The staff of the Tuscaloosa News and TideSports.com join WVUA 23's Jen Chapman at Will Hagen's Grill and Tap Room for an in-depth analysis of the Crimson Tide and SEC football. This is Tide Sports TV.
Welcome into Tide Sports TV. We are live from Will Hagen's at 6 p.m. every Monday night. The Tuscaloosa News and WVUA 23 brought together, and TideSports.com, the premium website for the Tuscaloosa News coverage of the University of Alabama athletics and the Rivals Network Alabama team site. Joining me for the big picture, brought to you by the Soup Store, the one and only Cecil Hurt from the Tuscaloosa News. Cecil, we are going to talk and recap Alabama's game, their 34-0 shutout win over Louisiana Monroe this past weekend. And I'm so sick of this word, and I'm sure some of these players are, but identity has been used over and over the last couple of weeks. Has the offense found their identity?
I think it's Clark Kent. I think that's going to be their identity. From here on, that's really all that's left. Bruce Wayne, Peter Parker, they could come up with one of those. But I thought that they played one quarterback for most of the game, certainly until the game was put away, and I think that'll help them. They weren't 100% with Derrick Henry because Derrick had tonsillitis during the week, and no sense in wearing him out, as Coach Saban said. But yeah, I thought that it doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't. You don't just say one Saturday, excuse me, we've got to get an identity and have it the next Saturday. But I thought they made some progress.
To borrow some words from Coach Saban, it's a process, and I feel like that's been the example with the offense. What did you see about the offense in the second half, though, that's showing some promise for the future?
Well, Jake seemed to get in a little bit better rhythm throwing the football. Kenyon had some opportunities to make some explosive plays. I thought that Calvin Ridley looked a little bit more comfortable as receiver. Great 19-yard touchdown pass to the fullback, which is something that's going to be open a lot if they run it. And so I thought that certainly glad for Michael Niswanger to score, but I also thought that was a great play call. So there were some good things.
And one of the things Coach Saban mentioning today at his press conference, kind of to take a little heat off of Coker, where there's 6 dropped passes.
Yeah, I thought that there were, whether it was 6 or 4, I thought there were certainly a couple of balls that were well thrown that weren't caught. And there were still some balls that weren't well thrown. So, it balances out somewhat. But they do, some of that's a timing issue. Some of that's the quarterback and the receiver being used to working with each other, and the receiver knowing to the millisecond when the ball is going to get there. Some of it is just lack of concentration and something that they can improve on.
And with so many first-year starters in those positions, it's going to be something that will come as the season goes. But playing Georgia this week, what needs to click now?
Well, everything, because Georgia's strong in all 3 phases. They are excellent running the football. Hudson Mason's been an accurate passer. They're fast defensively, have great athletes, recruit very well, and they're strong in special teams. So everything's got to click. You can't make the mistakes, certainly the mistakes they made against Ole Miss, but even the mistakes they made against Louisiana Monroe, you can't make those and expect to go over and win.
And perhaps this real identity of this team is the defense. Alabama's defense just showing up 34-0, so they put out the shutout. You don't look impressed there.
No, I thought, level of competition's a little bit hard to judge. Louisiana Monroe moved the ball a little bit more against Georgia than they did against Alabama, but Alabama's front 7 just dominated the game. Monroe had no hope of running the ball inside, very little hope of protecting the passer long enough to throw deep, so they were limited to some horizontal stuff and trying to attack the edges, and it had less than 100 yards. So it was a complete mismatch. And Alabama's front 7's as good as anybody in the country.
Reggie Ragland was saying today to the media that he told the team if they can't score on us, they can't win. So the goal was to have no points put on the board. That might not be as likely against Georgia. What does this defense have to do against Nick Chubb and this explosive offense with running backs? Well,
they have to do the same thing. They just have to be prepared that Georgia has much deeper, much better weapons. They will try to throw the ball downfield to Malcolm Mitchell. Chubb is a guy who can take a small hole and turn it into a big gain. So you've got to be prepared for those things. But what they need to do is be fundamentally sound in the areas that they weren't fundamentally sound against Ole Miss. Georgia's a better offensive team than Ole Miss. Time is going to show that. But you can't just shrug your shoulders and give them 43 points. You can't short field them on fumbling 2 kickoff returns. You can't give up, a tip ball touchdown if there's any way to prevent that. Some of that's luck, but some of it's being in position. Both of Ole Miss's long touchdown passes, and Georgia will look to exploit those kind of things. But where Georgia's better than Ole Miss is that they can run the football and run it effectively with Chubb, with Sony Michel, and with their offensive line.
And something interesting said today by Coach Nick Saban is that the Georgia team reminds him of previous teams he has coached here at Alabama. You've covered Alabama for years. Do you agree with that?
I see his point. It's a quarterback who's a little bit of a Greg McElroy type, good running backs, physical on defense. So there are some points of comparison, sure.
So does this play a little bit in the favor then of this coaching staff to be able to coach a team that's similar to them?
Well, preparation, they're prepared. There's not a game. Fans get into all that, but there's really not a game where a coaching staff's not prepared or doesn't know, what to do. Nick Saban pointed out today that the issue with playing Georgia is that they're so balanced, and that doesn't mean they run 50% of the time and pass 50% of the time. It just means they're capable of doing either one. Against a team like Monroe, who can't really run the ball, you can do some things with the secondary that help you there. Georgia, you can't afford to do that. You've got to be prepared for either run or pass on every snap of the ball.
And this is really the first big test for Alabama because they've got to go on the road. So a lot of these freshmen that are starting are going to get their first taste of what it's like to play in the SEC on the road. Is this something that they can really be ready for? I know the players said they're practicing with crowd noise.
Yeah, that'll be a bit of a factor, but they've done all the road trip things when they played Wisconsin. It was neutral field, and Alabama had the majority of the crowd. But again, you can do what Ole Miss did 2 weeks ago and come in and take the crowd out of it, and what Alabama did the last time they were in Athens. You can do that. So sure, it's a factor. You'd rather be at home, but it's everybody in the SEC plays 4 road games and 4 home games, so you got to deal with it.
Got to win them. So let's move on. Since we're in the big picture, let's go to the SEC. The surprise teams, and I've got to admit, I thought Arkansas and Tennessee were really going to step it up this year. They've let me down, so I'm a little off. Yeah. But who has surprised you in the SEC?
Well, Arkansas I thought would be better. Tennessee I thought was oversold in the preseason a little bit. So Florida, obviously, to be at 4-0, that's a great start for Mac down there. They've been, I'd say probably if you're looking for one surprise, I felt like Georgia would win the East. I think they're the best team in the East, and that's going to show. We'll see how Texas A&M plays. They narrowly got by Arkansas this weekend. They still could contend in the West. I think LSU's probably in the best position, and Ole Miss. It's just so early. Ole Miss is a surprise because they came into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama, which is surprising to do. They play at Florida this weekend, so we'll see how that works out.
What about nationally on the big scale? Who is now contending up at the top that you didn't even see there?
Well, I liked Utah. So I've seen games in Salt Lake City when they were opening against Michigan. A lot of people were picking Michigan just based on name. I said, there's no way. Now, I'm not going to say again that I saw them going to Oregon and scoring 60 points, but that result didn't shock me extensely. And everything else, the ACC is FSU and Clemson and 12 terrible teams. So that you don't have to think about them. Big Ten's the same, Ohio State and Michigan. I'll be interested to see Oklahoma and West Virginia on Saturday, see how that game turns out.
All right, that's all the time we have right now for the big picture, but when we return, Aaron Suttles will be breaking things down when we go inside the Tide. Stay with us. Welcome back into Tide Sports TV, live from Will Hagen's every Monday at 6. Now we are going inside the Tide, brought to you by Ziegler Meats. Joining me is Aaron Suttles of the Tuscaloosa News. Aaron, thanks for joining us.
Always.
All right, we've got to talk Alabama football, right. And we're, of course, going to start with the offense. Mm-hmm. And we'll start with, it's a slow offense to get the game going.
Yeah.
How do they get the game going faster, especially going into a team like Georgia? They cannot have the slow starts they've been having.
Have to avoid the slow start. The best way to do that is to execute better. You can't You can't keep making mental mistakes. Offensive line needs to protect, needs to run block. Wide receivers can't drop the ball. Jake needs to make good decisions. It all sounds so easy, right? But against a very talented Georgia team on the road, first real road test, it won't be. The simple answer is, and I know it's not simple, but they just have to execute.
And when you look at so many of these players for the first time playing with each other, that has to play into it. So that second half, it almost seemed like everything started to click a little bit more and they got into a rhythm.
Yeah.
How do they keep that going?
I think if Nick Saban knew that, he would pay a lot of money for that formula. Listen, losing Robert Foster hurt, I think, the wide receivers. You got now Calvin Ridley, a true freshman, starting. Ardarius Stewart is the other starter. He doesn't have a ton of experience either. Getting those guys, Nick Saban said it today, these guys have to play fast, have to play confident. They can't be scared of making mistakes. And I think that just comes with repetition, comes with playing the game. But, these are a lot of new players that you're plugging in that haven't played. And it'll be interesting to see here in Tuscaloosa, especially Bo Scarborough, what role he might have in this offense, whether he can play H-back, they play him some tight end, to see if they can he's such a dynamic athlete, to see if maybe they can spark something on offense.
You go from Amari Cooper and DeAndrew White, veterans, to now basically a rookie team.
It is.
And in some ways, it's a little bit of an unknown for a defense to have to be preparing for them because there are so many weapons. They do have a lot of weapons.
They do.
O.J. Howard, who wasn't really as much in the mix. But at the same time, there's so many weapons that need to still be learning the game and learning with Jake Coker.
Right, and they're unproven. Calvin Ridley is a tremendously talented wide receiver. He doesn't have much experience, and I think even though you saw it Saturday, caught a touchdown pass and he dropped one. You can't have those drops. That could be the difference in a win or a loss. But that's good. He's got his first start under his belt. Now maybe he's a little more confident heading into the road than he would have been had he not gotten that start.
And so on the encouraging side, yes, I'm more of a half-full type person, but those drops, a good positive for Coker is they were right on the money.
Yeah.
So that shows he has the accuracy and he's getting a little bit better as well. So good there. And then if we go to the running backs, Derrick Henry, he was out with tonsillitis, so they didn't show him as much. What do you expect out of him this week against Georgia?
Well, I didn't think Alabama, and Nick Saban said as much during his Monday press conference, they didn't show a whole lot against Louisiana Monroe. They were pretty vanilla, and that's why they had some issues. Louisiana Monroe was double blitzing the A-gap and stopping some of the runs. I think we'll see a healthier, obviously, Derrick Henry, which is good.
He said he was feeling better today, so that's good.
And, Kenyon Drake will get more carries. What was noticeable to me is how much and how fast Damian Harris is kind of getting more involved in the offense. And that's big for them to trust, with Derrick being a little ill, to put that responsibility on a freshman. I mean, they could have given Kenyon Drake 15, 20 carries, but they split the workload up such that Damian got some carries. And then late in the second half, you had Ronnie Clark getting a couple carries. So as I mentioned earlier, I am very excited. I followed it. I've covered his career since he was a freshman in high school, Bo Scarborough. To see, he's a 6'2", 240-pound, just like Derrick Henry. To have two of those in the same backfield, that'd be pretty scary, right?
And it's going to be fun to watch it this weekend because you haven't got to see it.
Exactly.
So that will be fun. Let's move on to defense, and Reggie Ragland saying that he told the team they could not score.
Yeah.
That was the goal. They obviously made it happen. Probably going to be a little bit harder against Georgia, but what can this front seven do to shut down Nick Chubb?
Well, they really haven't allowed any running back to get going on them this year. And I know Ole Miss put up a lot of yards, but Ole Miss didn't do a lot in the run game. They hit a couple perimeter runs on the goal line that scored touchdowns, but if you're going to make your living in between the tackles against Alabama, it's going to be a long day. I mean, they are big and they are strong, and there are a lot of them. Jaron Reed now, the outstanding senior defensive lineman, has been named the coach's Defensive Player of the Week 4 times after every game. He's had a tremendous year. Ashawn Robinson, Jonathan Allen, Reggie, Reuben. There's a lot of those guys, and they're big and they're fast. It's just very difficult to run on them.
I like how Saban said today, we named 7 guys on defense players of the week, and then he paused and he was like, we could have just named the whole defense. I guess we could have done that.
Right.
When you really look at it, they were changing in so many different times, and it didn't really matter what group was up there. No. They were still able to get a sack or put pressure on the quarterback.
Well, that was exciting, too, and you have to acknowledge the level of competition. Louisiana Monroe is not Georgia. But to get 6 quarterback sacks, to get as many tackles for losses, to absolutely just own the line of scrimmage gives them a lot of positive momentum going into Georgia.
Well, going to special teams, I know there was a lot of questions with Adam Griffith. I did say stay with him. Sometimes they just get in a little slump.
Right.
Well, do you think this past game gave him some confidence? The pressure wasn't as
Yeah.
high, not being an SEC game, but he made a kick. And I've got to say, I was looking back on highlights today. I think his field goal got the most thunderous
did.
applause
Yeah.
for the entire game.
Yeah, and it's good to get him going, right? I mean, kicking is such a mental game, and he made one against Ole Miss, but he didn't look all that confident the way he hit the ball. He looked confident in the 2 field goals he made against Louisiana Monroe. And as mental as that can be, with field goal kicking, especially on the road where they're going to be jeering you, it's going to be loud, he's going to be doubting himself, that's huge.
And in a game where this may be Georgia offense against Alabama defense, a field goal could be a deciding factor.
You're not kidding. I mean, how many times do SEC games come down to field goals? I mean, look at Florida and Tennessee this past weekend, came down to a field goal. Texas A&M almost lost a game because they missed a field goal at the end of regulation, went into overtime to win. The margin of victory in this conference is razor thin.
Let's move to the coaches. They have some big challenges ahead of them this week. But as Coach Saban said, he thinks this team is very familiar. They look like his
Right.
team almost.
Yeah.
So how does that help Saban and the coaching staff as they prepare?
Well, they practice against it every day, right? I mean, what Georgia has done, they hired an Alabama assistant strength coach whose goal was to make them more physical, make them bigger. They hired Jeremy Pruitt, who had coached at Alabama, to run their defense. So they're aggressive. They're big up front. They love to run the football. They want to be balanced on offense. They're aggressive on defense. They are essentially a mirror image. Alabama is bigger on defense, but they are built very, very similar. So Alabama is well-versed in going against that in practice. I mean, Alabama's offensive line goes against that defensive line every day in practice, and vice versa. So they should look across the line of scrimmage on Saturday and be pretty familiar with what they see.
And when the Tide running defense was asked about Georgia's running backs today, they basically said, we have Derrick Henry and Kenyon Drake. What do you think we're going up against?
Yeah.
And I also loved how Ragland today was just so open and said, this is going to be a physical game. If you don't like physical game, don't be in this one. So they're calling it.
And I think there's an element, they like facing this type of offense. I think they're more comfortable facing this pro-style offense than they are when you're spreading them out. I mean, this is what they're built for. They like the challenge of, hey, it's me versus you. Let's see who's tougher, who's going to win.
It's almost a better matchup than Ole Miss because it's more fitting.
Right.
All right, that's all the time we have for Inside the Tide, but when we come back, we get to answer your questions from the Tidesports.com message board. That's next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Tide Sports TV, live from Will Hagen's every Monday night at 6 p.m. Now it's time to answer your questions from the Tidesports.com message board. First question, is Alabama's offense improving as the season progresses? Who wants to answer that one first? I think we're all going to say yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Cecil, you go
sure,
first.
Yeah. These yes or no questions are easy, yes. Are they improving as much as the person who asked the question would like? Probably not. But are they gradually getting better? Sure. It's rare if there aren't some pretty deep issues. It's rare that teams don't get better. Sometimes guys give up. It hasn't happened at Alabama in a long time, but sometimes guys start losing. They get frustrated. They don't progress like you'd like. But they're certainly not in that situation. I think they're trying to get stable at quarterback and break in some new guys.
Yes, they are getting better. From where they started, replacing 3 new offensive linemen, top 3 wide receivers gone, brought in a graduate transfer, Richard Mullaney, working in now a couple other wide receivers with Robert Foster going down. So, yes, they are improving.
So that's a unanimous yes, and after a 34-0, I think that would be a yes.
Yes.
So the next question, who can step up at receiver? And I'm guessing they're asking this as Foster is out. Saban saying that today with Calvin Ridley in, or Darius Stewart getting more looks. Who do you guys feel needs to step up as a receiver? And I'm going to answer all of them.
Well, obviously, Calvin is a guy with a tremendous amount of talent, but it's inexperience. And, there'll be some growing pains along the way. I will say, I said this, based on people I talked to before the season, Richard Mullaney, and you saw in that Ole Miss game, Jake has a little bit of chemistry with him and kind of looks to him, and he's not going to be a game breaker. But as a possession receiver, guys that can keep drive alive, guy that's very savvy, can get open, he can do a lot in that passing game.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to see Chris Black and Cam Sims get as much work as they did. They're guys that hadn't had the practice time necessarily to develop that kind of rapport with the quarterback, and so they're kind of fighting their way back, but I think they both got some ability.
And when you don't have an Amari Cooper anymore, you guys just mentioned 4 names, and I said 2 before. I mean, there's just so many different targets for Coker to connect with, and I think that is a positive in some ways. There's plenty to look for.
And I'm going to say one thing, and this goes out to everybody. There is no Amari Cooper in college football this year.
No.
There's not one. There's some good receivers. There's not a guy. Amari's the number 5 pick in the draft, and there's about 3 teams that picked in front of the Raiders that wish they'd taken him higher.
Look what he's doing
And
every
he's
Sunday.
proving it. On Sunday he's already proving it.
Yes. Would they be better if Julio and Amari were here? Yes, 100%. They would.
So basically, get off it. We're moving on. All right, to the next question. Do you see Jay Coker improving so far, and what is his ceiling going forward? Do we all want to say yes again?
Well, yeah, and I mean, you got to remember it. Up until last week, it was almost you didn't know how much he was going to play. And then Saban gave him the majority of the reps last week in practice and let him play the majority of the game. So that was really his first kind of game doing that. So, yeah, he's getting better.
Right, and what his ceiling is, that depends. I mean, he's got good ability. Is he going to be a first-round draft choice? No. But is he a guy that can win games for you? Sure, absolutely. So that's what his ceiling.
In the words of Saban, we can't just look in here and predict.
And he's
the
a
future,
tough
right?
guy too. I mean, some of these scrambles, he's showing a lot of athletic ability, but a lot of toughness too.
Especially when he rushed in that touchdown at Ole Miss. I think that kind of showed a lot of people. All right, one more question. Which younger players, freshmen and redshirt freshmen, have gotten your attention? Cecil?
Well, I'll take offense and let Aaron do defense. We talked about Calvin Ridley at wide receiver, and he's certainly done some good things. Damian Harris has not gotten a lot of opportunities with the first offensive line. It's going to be fascinating to see how, as Aaron said earlier, how they work Bo Scarborough into the mix as he gets healthy. That doesn't mean he's going to go out and carry 20 times against Georgia. It takes time. He hasn't played in a long time. They've got young offensive linemen, Pierce Baker and some of the other young offensive linemen who I think are doing well. So, it takes time for those guys to work in on offense, more so than it does on defense. But those are some of the guys who have played well.
So, Aaron, how about the defense?
Well, how much time do you have? Because there are a lot of them. Obviously, you got to start with Minka Fitzpatrick and Ronnie Harrison, a couple of freshmen, true freshmen in the secondary who've played really well and are being asked to do a lot as true freshmen. Darren Payne hasn't played a lot, but he's a guy I like on the defensive line. And a name that people aren't noticing, he doesn't play a lot either, but in the coming years you're going to see him, is Keith Holcomb. He's getting some playing time. So there's a lot of talent on that defense, but you got to start with Minka and Marlon. I did mention Marlon, but Marlon's playing well. He's a redshirt freshman, Marlon Humphrey. So a lot of these young guys on defense.
And based off those answers, there is a lot of talent in this freshman class.
And one guy who's not a freshman or a redshirt freshman, but didn't play very much last year, and has really played well the last 2 games is Deshaun Hand.
Yes.
So
was
you're
one
saying
of the
is
coaches'
future's
players
bright.
of the week this week.
Deshaun Hand was
One of the
red.
7.
One of the 7. Basically the whole defense. So what we're saying is the future looks bright, but the first future we're looking forward to right now is Alabama taking on Georgia this weekend, their first SEC test on the road. We'll see how those freshmen handle that environment. That's all the time we have today for Tide Sports TV. You can catch us here live at Will Hagen's every Monday night at 6.